great job this morning. Really appreciate it. We're continuing our series today on the life of Daniel. And if you're new with us today and you look at this word, you're thinking that's not a real word. And that's because it's not a real word. It's a word I made up for the year, a word we're going to be focused on for 2022, and it's the word enduraverance. Enduraverance is a combination of two words, endurance and perseverance. And while they sound the same, and we often use them interchangeably, they actually serve two different purposes. The word endurance means the ability to withstand hardship or difficulty to finish a race. The word perseverance means why you withstand difficulty and hardship to finish a race. And so in life, it's not enough to have the ability to go through difficult times. It's not enough to know why you go through difficult times and keep pushing forward. You need to have the ability and the why together. You need enduraverance. And that's exactly what we see demonstrated in the life of Daniel. We've been walking through his life the last several weeks, and we've been kind of cherry-picking some of the stories out of there, not covering everything, every verse, but at least getting a really good overview of his life and what it means to live a life of enduraverance. There was a factory in Ohio several years ago that was dealing with a problem of theft. They did all kinds of work in the factory, but they were dealing with what they assumed were employees walking off with some of the materials or some of the things from the factory. So they hired an outside security agency. And the agency set up checkpoints all around the building, and nobody came or went without being inspected. Lunch boxes were open. Employees were patted down if they felt it was necessary. They were going to find where their materials were going. Well, it just so happened that one of the employees there was named Jim. And Jim happened to be good friends with Frank, one of the security guards who was hired for the job. They were on a bowling league together. And so Jim was coming out of the factory one day with a wheelbarrow filled with sawdust. And Frank said, "Jim, it's good to see you. I didn't know you worked here." And they were talking back and forth. And finally Frank's like, "Jim, you know I can't let you leave with this wheelbarrow of sawdust. You're obviously hiding something, and that's why I'm here." And Jim said, "I'm not stealing anything." And so Frank sifted through all the sawdust. There was nothing in there but sawdust. Frank says, "That's weird, but okay." The next day, Jim comes to the checkpoint again, another wheelbarrow full of sawdust. Frank says, "Jim, I know you're up to something." And he dug through it again, went through it piece by piece, couldn't find anything. He's like, "All right, you're good to go." This happened for 2 weeks straight. The company was so frustrated that the security agency couldn't figure it out that they fired him. And so they were at the bowling league the next week, and Frank said, "Jim, they let us go. We're not doing that job anymore. I know you were stealing something. What were you doing?" And Jim says, "You really want to know?" And Frank said, "Yeah, I really want to know." Jim said, "I was stealing wheelbarrows." You know, we can get so distracted by the contents of the wheelbarrow that we miss what's going on. Or they say you missed a forest for the sake of a tree. We get so distracted. I've read that the best illusionists, you know, the people who do like magic tricks, the best ones are the ones that know how to distract the audience. They get you looking over here while they're doing something over here, and by the time your attention turns, they've made something disappear or reappear or turn into a butterfly, whatever. Like they completely change it up because you're distracted. And I think that is one of culture's greatest challenges that we have to contend with if we're going to live a life of enduraverance. We have to contend with being distracted. In fact, I read about this true story about a ring of thieves that have developed this technique of distraction to steal from stores. Now, don't take notes on this part, because I don't want to be complicit in a crime. But what they do is they get about 4 of them, 5 of them together, and a couple of them go into the store apart from the other group. And they go to the back corner of the store and they cause a disturbance. Maybe they act like they're going to fight. Maybe somebody falls down and fakes a medical emergency. Something happens. And the other 2 make their way in the store while that's going on near the front entrance. The employees are distracted. They load up their pockets with lots of goodies, walk out the door because nobody is paying attention. And sometimes they're so slick with it that the store doesn't even know they've been robbed till 3 or 4 days later. How does it happen? It happens through distraction. So my question to you this morning is, what is distracting you? What is culture challenging you with that is distracting you from the cause of Christ? Because we are all facing distractions. January 13th, 2018. I bet you can't tell me what happened that day without Google, but I will tell you what happened that day. At 8:07 a.m., an alarm went off in Hawaii that there was an inbound missile headed for the island. And the people panicked. For the next 40 minutes, they thought a missile strike was imminent. Maybe a nuclear missile at that. And finally, at 8:45 a.m., they said, oops, our mistake. The guy who accidentally sounded the alarm was reassigned, whatever that means, and everything went back to normal. But one of the most interesting stories that came out of that event came from a pornography website. Now, I don't follow this website, but it happened to be on mainstream news media, and it caught a lot of attention at that time. There is a website, apparently, do not look this up, keep your phones put away, it's called Pornhub.com. And this website said that after the missile alarm sounded, usage on their website in Hawaii dropped by 77% below average at that time of day. 77% below average. Why? Because people thought they were getting ready to meet God. And they did not want to get to the pearly gates and Jesus say, welcome, what were you doing right before you got here? Well, funny story. I was researching this project and I got down, you just don't want to go there with God. And so for the next 40 minutes, people in Hawaii got very religious. They were prepared to meet Jesus, and they said, let's change our behavior. However, after it was found out it was a false alarm, the levels did not go back to normal. No, 48% above normal traffic on that particular website. So here's the chart, and so you follow me here. This is where it was at right here at 8:19. The alarm sounded back here at 8:07, so it drops off immediately. And by 9:01, what do we got? 48% above, 125% increase from this point to that point. What happened? They got distracted very quickly. Why? Because they didn't think they were in any imminent danger to meet Jesus after all that day. Now, I don't know what it is for you, whether it's a missile alarm that goes off, but what is it going to take to get your attention? And not only that, what is it going to take to keep you from yo-yoing back and forth? Because that's the problem with the human condition. Is something gets our attention for a little bit, but then we get distracted all over again. And so it really leads to the first question I want to ask you is, what motivates you to make a change? What motivates you to make a change? For some people, it's New Year's. New Year's is coming up, I'm going to make a change. Or for some people, it could be any number of things. If you say you had a drinking problem, and you had almost an accident, or you got a DUI, maybe that's the motivation you need to say, I got to change my behavior. Or, maybe it's smoking, and then all of a sudden you went to the doctor, and the doctor's like, hey, I see a spot on your lung. You're like, oh, I got to change my behavior. I remember when I was in high school, I had a friend named Nick who liked to chew tobacco in high school. Country high school is what people did. And anyway, he ended up with mouth cancer at 17 years old. 17 years old. He's like, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. I said, well, how about that? And after he got it cut out and he was clear, he went right back to chewing like he had. So we can get motivated to change for a very short window of time, but it is rarely lasting. Sometimes, though, we're motivated to change because of wanting to fit in. We want to be like somebody else. It reminds me of an episode of the best TV show that ever existed, The Andy Griffith Show. So it's been a little while since I played a clip from there, but we're getting ready to play a clip now where Barney has a couple of prisoners in the cells. And he's listening to them have a conversation. And he realizes, wait a minute, I'm not doing things like they do in the big city. I'm not acting like a big city jail. I need to make some changes so I can show them that I'm big time. So let's take a look now and see what Barney does.
You're short. Okay, I'll get right up there. I got to go up to Carter Franklin's place. Say it's all to me. Now look,
don't give it a thought, Andy. Everything is A-OK.
Yes, sir. They sure run this place tighter than even the state pen.
Huh? Oh, sure.
Except the one thing,
What?
the shakedown. We've been here for hours. Not one shakedown.
Shakedown?
You know, all prisoners out while the screws make a surprise inspection of the mattresses for knives and things. Oh, well. Guess you can't expect them to know those things out here in the sticks. Can't expect them to know about a shakedown.
All right, shakedown! Shakedown! Let's go, everybody out! Come on, move! Let's go, shakedown time! It's shakedown time for guns and knives! Not that I think you boys would be foolish enough to try anything here at the Rock, but we don't take no chances. Yes, sir, you better get up pretty early in the morning. Tiny? Guys? Sarah! Sarah, Mayday! Come on, Sarah! Oh, nothing, sir. No, I didn't say anything about pay. Hi, Andy.
How'd they get loose?
Well, I was conducting my shakedown, and I told them not to leave. Now, it was their fault. It's your case of disobedience, and it ought to go right on their record.
Barney was always motivated to be like the big city. He wanted to be important, and he felt Mayberry was always lacking in importance. And so he always was looking to change, whether it was to bring in a motorcycle, which is a great episode, whether it was to follow the rule of the law where you would arrest jaywalkers, it made no difference. Barney wanted to be big time, and it motivated him to change constantly, and it usually messed him up as a result. But what about you in your life? Has there been a change that you've done that has been long-term? Obviously, it can't be recent, otherwise it wouldn't be long-term. But can you say, I made a change and it's been different in my life for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? That's something that you have to examine in your own life and something that you need to determine. And if you have, the question is why? Again, maybe it's a health scare, and so then you got to make changes. Or maybe it was, like I said, a near accident, and you had to make changes. Something happened that motivated you to change. I used to watch the show, it's not on anymore, the 600-Pound Life show. I really enjoyed it. And they almost all the people who struggle with that issue, they almost all said the same thing. They felt like a prisoner in their own bodies. A prisoner in their own bodies. And so that was what motivated them to seek change. But less than 5%, it said, would have lasting results. So we can be motivated to change for a very short window of time, but what motivates us to change for a lasting experience? In the book of Daniel, chapter 5, we covered this story back in October, so I'm not going to deep dive on every detail, but we are going to go into it today. In Daniel chapter 5, we have a change of power. And in this chapter, we have had Nebuchadnezzar as king all the way up until through chapter 4. And Nebuchadnezzar himself wrote chapter 4. But when we get to chapter 5, we now see a new king named Belshazzar who is in charge. And we find out that he is either the son or grandson of King Nebuchadnezzar. He's called his son, but some people say with timelines it would probably be his grandson. Neither here nor there. It doesn't make a big difference in the big picture. We'll call him Nebuchadnezzar's son for simplicity purposes today. So Belshazzar is king, and he's having a great feast with 1,000 of his nobles, wives, and concubines. And he gets this brilliant idea to bring out the cups that were stolen from the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem and drink wine out of them with his wives and concubines. And so they do that. And as they're in the process of doing this, a hand appears, materializes, and writes some words on the wall that nobody can interpret. Now, you would think you'd just had a little too much to drink when you start seeing a handwriting on the wall. Maybe I should stop. But this scares Belshazzar sober. He is instantly well aware of what's going on. He's afraid. His legs give way. He collapses to the ground in fear. Hey, no judgment. I probably would have done the exact same thing, but it's a really bad look when the king collapses in fear. And so he instantly says, whoever can interpret this for me, I'll give great wealth and riches, and I'll make him the third highest in the kingdom. Now, why did he say third highest? Because his father, Nebuchadnezzar, was most likely leading a war campaign outside of Babylon. He's still number one. Belshazzar's in charge while he's away, so Belshazzar's number two. So he can only promote someone to the third highest in the kingdom, which is why he makes that offer. But nobody can interpret it. They don't know what it means. It says, then the queen came down from the upstairs apartments when she heard a great commotion going on. Now this must have been interesting, because there was a party going on with 1,000 people that were drinking and having fun, but something changed in the tone where she said, I need to go down there. This is probably Belshazzar's mother, or grandmother as it were, the wife of Nebuchadnezzar, because she wanted nothing to do with this celebration feast that was going on. And she shows up and says, you know, there was a man who served your father well, Daniel, and he can interpret signs and dreams. So Daniel is brought in. It's interesting that Daniel is forgotten about at this point. Whatever time lapsed from chapter 4 to chapter 5, Daniel's been kind of shoved off to the side, so it would seem. And he is brought in, and Belshazzar makes the same proclamation. If you can interpret this, I'll give you great wealth, riches, third highest in the kingdom. And Daniel says, keep it. I don't want it, but I will interpret it for you. So let me pick it up here in Daniel chapter 5. We're going to pick it up in verse 22 as we get going here. But you, his son, O Belshazzar, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. So what is Daniel referring to? Well, in several verses, Daniel lays out a history lesson to King Nebuchadnezzar. And he tells King Nebuchadnezzar that, or tells King Belshazzar that, you know, your father learned some tough lessons. He learned what it meant to dishonor God and what would happen to him, and he learned what it meant to honor God, and he eventually honored him, and as a result, God honored Nebuchadnezzar in return. And you knew this, but you refused it. And here's what's really interesting. If you go back to chapter 4, the very last words written of Nebuchadnezzar that we have in history, he says this: those who walk in pride, God is able to humble. And now Daniel says, but you, Belshazzar, have not humbled yourself, though you knew this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. Have you thought about that? Every time we choose to walk in pride, and pride means we choose to sin over honor God. In my interpretation of it, that's all pride is. Pride saying, God, I know what you say, but this is what I want to do. That takes a lot of arrogance and pride. Anytime that we choose to sin intentionally, we set ourselves up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from the temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand, but you did not honor the God who holds in his life, in his hand, your life and all your ways. He's in big trouble. It's interesting though, because Belshazzar, there's so many names here, getting them all mixed up here. Belshazzar had the knowledge, but knowledge rarely leads to proper action by itself. That's what's really interesting when you start thinking about it. How much knowledge do we have in life? You know, we have people always doing more research on various things. There's so much research that doesn't need to be done anymore. We know the dangers associated with certain behaviors. We know the diets we should follow. We know the exercise plans we should. We don't need new inventions for those things. We have enough knowledge, but it doesn't seem to manifest itself in behavior. And why is that? And I don't have a good answer for that for you this morning. For whatever reason, knowledge is rarely the motivator we need to change. Oftentimes, we need to experience difficulty. We need to go through hardship. We need to have a near-death experience. We need to have a serious loss. We need to go through some kind of trauma to shock us into reality that says, I need to make a change. And that's a bummer. I mean, I don't want that for anybody. I don't want that for me. I don't want that for you. I don't want anybody to have to experience that. But the reality is, that seems to be the nature of the human condition. That we have to experience difficulty in order to truly accept change. So what motivates you to change? For whatever reason, knowledge was not enough for Belshazzar. But if we could learn and apply the knowledge without going through the pain and the difficulty, how much better our lives would be. Secondly, how do you respond to warnings? How do you respond to warnings? Let's go back to Daniel chapter 5 for just a minute. Daniel gives Belshazzar the warning. This is what the inscription that was written says. These are what the words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. We all have warnings in life. We all have warning signs that go off. And do we pay attention to them or do we ignore them? Well, let me finish reading this passage and then we'll get into that a little bit more. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, a gold chain placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. So Daniel didn't want it. Belshazzar gave it to him anyway. And the very next verse. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain. And Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. How do you respond to warnings? We don't get a very long glimpse at how long Belshazzar had from the warning of Daniel to when Darius the Mede broke in. Did he have 5 minutes? An hour? Did it go deep into the night? We don't know. But all that we do know is he didn't do anything about it. I'm going to buy my way out of this. I'm going to give Daniel all the riches, and his God will be happy with that. And that very night he was slain. You can't buy yourself out of many problems in life. So how do you respond to warnings? We all have warnings, and we either have to pay attention to them or we ignore them at risk to our own peril. And you can easily use a physical example. You get a little pain in your chest. Oh, it's indigestion. I ate too much or too much spicy foods. That's all it is. Well, possibly. It also could be more like a heart problem and you need to get it checked out. A little tingling on your left arm. Well, I laid on the arm funny in bed last night. That's all it was. Maybe even probably. But maybe there's something a little bit more serious going on. Or how about when your check engine light comes in on your car? Every time I see it, the first thought comes to my mind, O2 sensor. That's all it is, just an O2 sensor. Probably. But maybe not. And you better get it checked out. It's not always just tighten the gas cap. There might be a little bit more going on. Or if you're dealing with anger, or dealing with depression, if you're dealing with frustration. Well, everybody goes through that. I'll get over this. Maybe. But you also might need to seek professional help. We need to respond to warnings. At our workouts that Greg and I go to, we meet a whole host of people from all different sorts of backgrounds. And we all go by silly nicknames, as you know. And one of the guys there is a counselor, and so his name is Dr. Phil. And so I was talking to him this week, and I said, Dr. Phil, he counsels for Christian Family Services, great guy, real grounded in his faith, tries to help people through difficult scenarios. And I said, so do you stay real busy? He said, kind of. I'm like, what do you mean, kind of? He goes, well, people make a lot of appointments, and a lot of them don't show up. I'm like, what? He goes, yeah, they sign up for it, but then when it comes time to actually follow through, they just don't do it. And I thought, wow, that's really disappointing to hear, because you're on the road to recovery by admitting the problem. You're on the road to recovery by going to someone who can help you through it, and then to just not even show up, it's got to be frustrating for him when he's like, I can help you if you will let me help you. But you know what happens all the time? People ignore problems and just say it's not a big deal, and it becomes a really big deal. One of the reasons that people often ignore warning signs is they're distracted. Well, I got so much going on right now, I'll deal with that later. There may not be a later if you don't deal with that right now. We have to quit being distracted. That's why I think it's important for most people that if you're going to have a Bible reading plan, a prayer plan, you'd put it first thing in the morning before something else gets in your way to distract you. Now, maybe you don't function well in the morning and it doesn't work for you, that's fine. But if you put it off to the end of the day or the time when you're not going to be busy, you're never going to get to it. You're never going to stick with it. It's not going to be the priority that it needs to be. We are so easily distracted. So I'm going to ask you today, what are you ignoring and what is distracting you? What are you ignoring and what is distracting you? In the Bible, Jesus tells the parable of the wealthy landowner. And he has a bumper crop. I mean, so much grain, his barns won't hold it. And he says, what am I going to do? I know. I'm going to tear down my barns. I'm going to build bigger barns. All right. Tongue twister this morning. We're going to build some really big barns, and then I'm going to retire, eat, drink, and be merry. And it says, the Lord spoke to him that day. Said, you fool. When God calls you a fool, you can take that to the bank. You fool. Didn't you realize this very night your life will be demanded of you? What then will you get out of what you've stored up for yourself? What are you distracted by? We are distracted by stuff in America like nothing I've ever seen. I had to look up some stats here. Let me read them for you. According to various websites, the number one form of real estate going into through 2021 was U.S. self-storage. Self-storage. $39.5 billion are earned annually from these facilities. There are over 49,000 self-storage facilities in our country. Only 11% of people use them. That surprised me. But anyway, it said 11% of people use them at an average cost of $89 a month. And so they're busy. And I saw another statistic that said the 66% of people who have a storage unit have a basement, attic, and or garage. So it's not that they're lacking space, they just have too much stuff for the space that they have. And what did Jesus tell the wealthy landowner? You fool! What then will you get out of what you've saved for yourself? This very night, your life will be demanded of you. That's a serious warning that we need to take to heart. And so what we need to realize is the time is now. The time is now. We have to quit putting off what needs to be done till a better time. And now is the best time to make a change. You know, I used to hate New Year's resolutions. Years ago, I just thought they were the dumbest thing. And then I decided, you know what? I'll give it a try. And guess what I found out? I was pretty good at New Year's resolutions. For several years, I kept almost every resolution I made. I was just blazing through them, and it felt great. And then I started talking to other people about them. And what I found out is we get to like October. And, you know, every now and then someone might bring up a resolution coming up. They say, yeah, I'm going to start that in January. It's October. We got November. We got December. You got 90 days that you're going to put off making an important decision. Why would you do that? And so I've kind of gone back the other way where I don't care for the resolutions, only on the basis is we use it as an excuse to delay good behavior. We want that fresh start of January 1st. Well, if you didn't have the calendar, what's January 1st? It's whatever day of the week it falls on. That's all that it is. The time to make a decision is right now. And so we need to quit delaying the important decisions of our life. So what is your biggest concern in life today? Is it spiritual matters? Is it the kingdom of God? Or is it how big the barn is and that you can fit all your stuff? What is your biggest concern in life today? What challenges are you facing? What is distracting you from what is most important? And what steps do you need to take right now to get focused where you need to be? Well, as the worship team joins me on stage, that is a personal evaluation you have to make on your own. I can't do it for you. Your friends and family can't do it for you. Only you can truly know what is distracting you and what decisions you need to make to get on the right road today. But the time is now. There's no reason to delay a good, healthy decision. Why would you delay that? It might make the difference between more time or less time. The time is ultimately now. At some point, we're all going to stand face to face with Jesus. At some point. Lord willing, we'll have many more years together, and that's great, assuming he doesn't return before then. But the time to choose him as your Lord and Savior is right now. There's no better time than the present. We're not guaranteed tomorrow. We're not guaranteed a fresh start in January. You can have a fresh start right now by trusting Jesus, who promises to wash away all our sins and to prepare a place for us that is perfect. Why would you delay accepting that free gift? There's no reason for it. There's no good reason for it. So this morning, if you need to put Jesus first, the time is right now. You meet me down front, and we'll work on that together as we stand and as we sing.